I don't know about you, but I took so many great notes on all of these comparisons between If by Rudyard Kipling and The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde. They both use repetition, but in totally different ways, and they have very different themes about vulnerability, but they also have similar themes about doing the right thing, and they use completely different craft moves to get there. I am so ready to turn this in! But I guess I could make it a little more organized first, and a little less run-on-y. Today's mission is to organize our thoughts by making a point-by-point outline that compares how Wilde and Kipling use craft moves to create a theme. Then we'll create an aligned thesis statement for that outline. Let's dive in and see how this outlining method turns all of my convoluted ideas into a polished piece of comparative analysis. Comparative analysis means we have two pieces of evidence per paragraph, longer reasoning, and a more complex claim. That's why comparative essays use unique structures to help us express our ideas clearly. We'll learn about a few different structures, so at the end of the unit, you can choose which one suits you best. Today, we'll focus on the point-by-point structure. And it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. When using this structure, you focus on one point of comparison in each paragraph, like a craft move or theme, and you compare how both texts explore that idea. We'll use this structure to respond to the prompt. Compare how craft moves are used by Victorian-era authors to create a theme. And boy, do I have some examples of Kipling and Wilde using these same craft moves to create the same theme, different craft moves to create different themes, same craft moves to create different themes. Okay, yeah, you get the picture. If I'm trying to spot a point of comparison by looking at my notes, right off the bat, I notice that both authors use repetition. But my prompt says that we need to compare, not just the craft move, but the themes they create as well. Wilde's repetition was kind of a desperate plea, as he said, "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," while Kipling's "if you can" at the start of every line was more rhythmic and removed. So my point of comparison would be something like, both authors use repetition to create contrasting themes. Using my notes, pause your video and identify two more points of comparison, or how the craft moves and themes are similar or different. There are lots of ways to compare these two authors, so you don't need to have the same answers I do. Just make sure you feel comfortable showing a clear similarity and/or difference between the way they use craft moves to create themes. One idea could be how each author uses metaphors to create different themes. Another could be how they both are creating a theme about emotional strength. I could also use my idea from earlier and focus on their shared use of repetition to build contrasting themes. In all three of these, I am identifying my point of comparison: metaphor, theme about emotional strength, or repetition. Each point becomes a claim for a body paragraph in my essay. And we already know how to create a comparative claim thanks to these two. We'll use those same skills we practiced last time to help us with claims for a point-by-point outline. Using one of these 3 points of comparison and our comparative claim criteria, create one possible claim for this essay. Your claim should be more specific than the point of comparison. As always, we probably didn't end up with the exact same answer, and that's fine. Make sure you are checking your answer using the same reasoning I used to check mine, and jot some notes about each sample answer as we go. For the first point of comparison, you might have written something like, both Kipling and Wilde use metaphors to develop the themes of morality. But Kipling uses them to emphasize virtue through self-discipline, while Wilde uses them to highlight the importance of compassion and sacrifice. This tells my reader what my point of comparison is, what my basis for comparison is, and what the difference is between the two. For the second claim, I wrote that While both authors explore themes of emotional strength, Kipling does so through personification, while Wilde uses symbolism. This time, my point of comparison is their shared focus on emotional strength. I also establish my basis for comparison and the difference between the texts, so it's clear to my reader what this paragraph will be about. The third claim could be something like, Kipling and Wilde use repetition to create contrasting themes, Kipling focusing on emotional mastery, and Wilde exploring emotional vulnerability. The craft move of repetition is what's being compared. The contrasting themes are the basis of comparison, and those differences between their themes are what I outline for the reader. This is starting to look more organized already. But claims aren't the only thing we need to include in our point-by-point outline. When we were in the exploration lab, we learned that our thesis statement is the destination for our essay. It sums up what our essay is about by including a version of all of the claims we will make along the way. Which sounds easy enough now that I have all my claims. I'll just jot down my thesis real quick. Kipling uses repetition, personification, and metaphors, while Wilde uses metaphors, symbolism, and repetition, which is different. Uh-oh, the Department of Reflection is flying off the shelf, which means this thesis statement might need some refining. Do you see anything wrong with it? Chapter 5, Checklist for Writing a Comparative Analysis Thesis. Before moving on, make sure your thesis names both authors, synthesizes all claims, and takes a clear stance. This means my thesis statement should name all points of comparison in my essay. Pause your video and complete this checklist for my thesis statement. Yeah, it looks like this could use some work. I identified the authors and the craft moves, but I didn't connect any of the craft moves to a theme, so I did not fully synthesize all of my claims. That's a major part of the prompt that I don't want to miss. I was also way too vague about what the differences are between them. Let's try this again. Using our 3 claims and the thesis checklist, pause your video and write a strong thesis statement for a comparative analysis essay. We are fitting a lot of information into our thesis, so feel free to use semicolons, colons, or even 2 sentences if you need to. Whew! Mine is pretty long, and it's okay if yours is too. Let's see how our answers compare. I wrote that Kipling and Wilde use figurative language to develop themes of morality, but they differ in key ways. Kipling emphasizes self-discipline, while Wilde highlights compassion. Kipling uses personification, and Wilde uses metaphors to create a shared theme about emotional strength, and both authors use repetition to form contrasting themes on emotional vulnerability. Right off the bat, I name both authors. Then I jump into my first claim, my second claim, and my third claim. Notice that I'm not including all of the words in my claims, but I am including the important parts that show my points of comparison. Lastly, I am not just restating the prompt, I take a stance on if the author's use of craft moves to create themes are more similar to or different from one another. We are well on our way to finishing a point-by-point outline. We're practicing not just comparing 2 texts, but 2 entire views of morality. Through identifying points of comparison, we were able to build claims and practice turning those claims into a thesis statement that's structured, specific, and ready to lead a full essay. As you work through your lesson materials, you will identify more points of comparison for your own outline, create a strong thesis statement, and select evidence that supports your analysis. Remember, you're not just writing about craft, you're crafting an argument of your own. See you next time!